The U.S. Justice Department just lurched further left. Don't give it more power. Our next guest delivered that warning in a column posted at carolinajournal.com. Dr. Andy Jackson is director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. And Andy, this column basically, from my reading, had two key points. One was about a new official who's involved with elections issues at the federal level. The second has to do with a piece of legislation that would give that official and her colleagues more powers that we shouldn't want them to have. So first of all, let's start with the recent Senate vote to confirm Kristen Clarke to head an important part of the U.S. Department of Justice. Tell us about it, please.
Right. Kristen Clarke has just been appointed to head the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. Among other things, the head of the Civil Rights Division oversees their voting laws or the application of the Voting Rights Act, the voting division. And so as far as an elections perspective go, who's in charge of that division, who gets to assign people to work those cases, who gets to decide whether or not certain cases are going to be pursued by the Justice Department. It's a really important position, and who you have in that position really signals what your intentions are going to be towards voting rights enforcement.
And your column points out that Kristen Clarke, as the head of this organization, is a problematic choice.
She is. The main reason that she's a problematic choice is that she has a particular view, as seen by her actions, of voting rights. There's essentially a choice between whether or not we're going to say we're going to have laws and rules to say that people cannot be discriminated against, people cannot have the right to vote taken away on account of race, or we're going to use this as a kind of bludgeon for an identity politics situation where it's not conceivable, for example, that there could never be a white victim of a voting rights case, for example. There's a very specific case that she came up here, and this is United States versus Ike Brown. This was in Mississippi, and this is in a majority Black county. Clearly, in the 60s, 70s, when the Voting Rights Act first came out in that particular county in Mississippi, there was discrimination against Black voters who are a majority in that county. But as time went on, we got into the 80s and the 90s, Mr. Brown, who was a Democratic Party official there, and his organization started to discriminate against the voting rights of white people in that county in Mississippi. And that includes illegally altering voting rolls, illegally altering absentee ballots.
Yeah, and you point out in your column that as this came to court, a suit was filed. So folks within the U.S. Justice Department just didn't want to touch it because of the people involved.
There were several groups, kind of what people traditionally think of as civil rights groups, among them the NAACP, who, when they saw this particular case, because at the time alleged perpetrator was Black and the alleged victims at the time were white, they said, well, we don't want to pursue this. And the person that was really pushing that was Kristen Clarke, who was counsel for the NAACP at the time. She was actually visiting with officials in the Department of Justice, encouraging them not to participate in that investigation or not to pursue that investigation.
And so you conclude, after going through the details of this case, the same Kristen Clarke, who so vigorously opposed the DOJ applying the Voting Rights Act in a race-neutral manner, will oversee the division charged with enforcing that act. That sounds like a recipe for problems to me.
It is, and for a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, we can't be assured that here on out that there are going to be cases that will be pursued in a race-neutral manner. As this country becomes more diverse, the victims of discrimination are going to also become more diverse. That's the kind of the nature of things. And also, with her in charge of this, there's another bill that comes in here. It's HR 4, which would, among other things, bring back pre-clearance. And for those folks who don't remember this, this was struck down in a court case Shelby versus Alabama, in which they struck down preclearance. And preclearance is a system where any state, mostly in the South and the Southwest, that wants to have any alteration in their election law, any reform, any update, has to take that to the Department of Justice. And if the Department of Justice doesn't like it, they can strike it down and say, no, you can't implement it. And then the state in question has the burden of proof in a circuit court in DC. The state has the burden of proof of showing how this is in fact not discriminatory. If you have somebody with Ms. Clark's temperament and outlook in charge of a Justice Department that is armed once again with preclearance, you're going to have a whole host of voting laws that are in all likelihood going to be struck down because of her political views. Namely, the big one that we've been fighting over in North Carolina lately is voter ID.
Yeah, in fact, you conclude near the end of your piece that a DOJ armed with preclearance and advised by a leftist-dominated CRD, Civil Rights Division, would endanger North Carolina election laws, including popular reforms like voter ID. So is the bottom line that with an activist at the head of the Civil Rights Division, if that person also has the provisions that are spelled out in H.R. 4, we would be unlikely to see many of the helpful election reforms that are talked about now?
Yeah, that's likely. Any of the reforms that we're talking about now, pretty much anything where you have the left in opposition to a reform law, we could pretty much guarantee that it is going to be struck down in preclearance.
If you would like to learn much more, you can go to carolinajournal.com and read the column. Its headline, "The U.S. Justice Department just lurched further left. Don't give it more power." Its author is Dr. Andy Jackson. He is director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. Thanks so much, Andy.
Thank you.